Welcome to the African Space Leadership Institute. Thank you for joining us on the maiden edition of View from the Sides, where we reflect on important developments in space, especially as it affects Africa. First, I need to express sincere apologies to everyone, including those who are not able to participate in this program right now. Initially, we were planning for this meeting to hold tomorrow, but in South Africa, it's a public holiday, more or less the start of the summer holidays. So we had to bring it forward to today. This may have caused a couple of conveniences, and many people are not able to join us live. Also, we have to take into consideration colleagues that are presently in Washington, D.C., attending the U.S. Leaders Summit, U.S. Africa Leaders Summit. Hence, we chose a time which is presently evening in Africa. A lot of people may have closed for the day or are on the verge of closing. So we also understand that this will cause some inconveniences later. But people that are not able to participate with us now can watch the video later on. Thanks once again. Welcome. As a preamble, the U.S. Africa Leaders Summit started on Tuesday, 13th December, and it's supposed to end today, 15th December. On the first day, which was Tuesday, the U.S. Africa Space Forum was held. And today, there are going to be sessions. Yesterday and today, there are sessions on astronomy. Meshack Ndiritu and Charles Takalana are part of the African delegations, and they are here to share with us some of the deliberations and the outcome of the space-related sessions of the summit. When you were registering for the program, you would have seen their profile. So I'm not going to go through their profile right now, but just to say that Meshack Ndiritu is the Space Applications Training Officer at the African Union Commission, while Dr. Charles Takalana is the head of Secretariat at the African Astronomical Society. Meshack and Charles, thanks very much for carving out time. I know the summit is still ongoing, and I know there's still a session later this evening on astronomy, but thank you for taking our time to join us on the program. So let me start with Meshack. Let's go back a bit. When the announcement for the U.S. Africa Leaders Summit came up, and specifically when there was a mention that there was going to be U.S. Africa Space Forum, what was the feeling in the African Union Commission? What was the feeling, the reception? What was it like then?
Good evening or good afternoon, team, and good afternoon, Charles, Otu, and Marco, and anyone else in the platform. I would like, first of all, to thank the ASLI for organizing this particular event. And not only that, team, as you know, we actually came to participate in the US Africa Space Forum because of you and your leadership at the ASLI. Since you held that virtual workshop, it caught the attention of the US and African continent on why we need to have a central role around space during this summit. And I think for the first time, we have had a lot of priority on space, because when the summit was beginning on Tuesday rather, it started off with the Africa US Space Forum. And then the intention of that workshop or that session was to highlight the importance of space in contribution to this dialogue of space. I mean, of development, of peace and security, and many other sectors that are cutting across. So I would say that were it not for the ASLI highlighting these issues during that virtual forum, actually the issue of space was going to be sidelined. And since then, you also been coordinating in the background to ensure that we have proper participation from the African continent, and this is exactly what happened, because the Space Forum brought a lot of high-level engagement from the US side and from the African side, with the participation of at least two presidents in the room. And the African Union Commission was there to highlight on the continental drive on space, but it was also good to it was also a great opportunity that these two countries highlighted and re-emphasized the importance of space, not only at the continental level, but also at the regional or the country level. And we received it with a lot of excitement from our side, and we prepared accordingly. Our commissioner in the leadership of African Union was there and was well informed of what is happening. And now the space dialogue is actually taking shape within the African Union Commission itself, within member countries, and also, I believe, across the continent of Africa.
So generally for the Space Forum, what was the general outcome of the deliberations? Before we now go into the details, but generally, what were the deliberations and the outcome?
So the main feeling from the outcome from the forum is that there is a clear intention to have participation or to have that collaboration between US and Africa as a continent, as individual countries, space engagement. And US is recognizing, the role of Africa, not only as a beneficiary of space services, but also as a contributor and a key partner, with a lot of contribution that can come through many dimensions, not only the value chain, but also upstream and downstream. They're recognizing the recent efforts of what countries like Zimbabwe, Uganda are doing in launching CubeSat in collaboration with Japan and US. You remember there's DIMSAT and the BIRDS program satellite that was launched recently. It was actually launched from the US, or even though it was developed from Kyushu Institute of Technology. And Senator Bill Nelson mentioned this specifically, that these are some of the things that are notable to the US, and they believe that it has come to a time when space has to be treated as one of the development pillars for collaboration.
So when the announcement was first made, for the Space Forum, there were three major areas that were slated for discussion. Climate change, that's one. Then two was promoting responsible behavior in space. And three, strengthening cooperation in science and commercial space activities. Apart from these three main issues, were there other things that were discussed during the Space Forum?
Yes, in fact, we had two very exciting panels highlighting this and more other areas of collaboration. The center stage was that space has now to be treated as one of the trade instruments. As you know, this forum is centered around collaboration in terms of trade and industry, movement of services and goods. And then there are other issues like peace and security. There are other issues that have to be considered. But most importantly is also that space has to be considered as one of the instruments of trade and industry, both in services, human capital and skills, as well as the infrastructure development. So what came out clearly is that apart from having, the academia collaboration, the government to government collaboration, there is also need to have, private sector engagement or cross-fertilization of this private sector from the US and Africa in space. And there's a lot of commitment and a lot of eagerness from the US side and from the African side to ensure that the growth of the industry on the continent happens through these mutual agreements that are going to come up. We had a lot of interest around, positioning ourselves in the Artemis program as well, because you realize that there are two countries that mentioned or that signed instantly during the Space Forum. That was which was the other one? There was Rwanda, and then Nigeria came to sign, and I believe others have followed accordingly to sign. I heard that Kenya was going to do that, even though it is not announced yet. So, and the reason for signing this Artemis Accord is not only to, realize that there is, that need for Africa to go to the moon. Of course, there is. But importantly is how can we play that role of enabling the Artemis program and ensuring that we also contribute to the lunar economy. And we are positioning our continent in terms of the geographical advantages. We are positioning ourselves in terms of things like the scientific knowledge and skills that we have, even though it may not be very well in the infrastructure, but we have soft skills like geology, mining extractions, additive value addition to the minerals and all that. So the Artemis program signature is actually sending a lot of waves in this, and the continent is placing itself as a key partner, not just as a passive participant to these Artemis missions, but to actually contribute and help the Americans as well as the world to achieve the lunar economy. And there is a belief that also it's time for Africa to have their own space capability in terms of upstream engagement on deployment of infrastructure in space. There's a huge potential that is recognized. The population is just one end. The needs that include cut across climate change, like you said, disaster management, but there's also a centerpiece on peace and security, which can be a big benefit. I mean, can benefit a lot from the space services that we derive.
Oh, okay, thank you. Participants that maybe have questions or want to make comments, you may want to use the chat box. Or if we have time, we can now come back and people can now do any verbal contribution. If I may come to Dr. Takalana, one of the major discussions was had to do with the IAU, that's the International Astronomical Union General Assembly 2024. Before we go into what was discussed during this summit, would you like to give a background about the IAU General Assembly 2024, what's about, and maybe the level of preparation towards that?
Right. Thank you, Etim, and thank you, Meshack, for that very nice sort of description of what happened earlier this week. So for those of you that might not know what the IAU is, it is the International Astronomical Union. And it's the international body that for astronomy globally, and so they've got members who are professional astronomers from across the world, and some of these are from Africa. And so if you look at Africa, there's not a lot of professional astronomers compared to the rest of the world. But then recently, through various efforts across the continent, there's been various infrastructures coming up and various human capital development programs that have come up, and that sort of increased the voice of Africa within the International Astronomical Union. So the International Astronomical Union has been in existence for over 100 years. It hosts its General Assembly every 3 years. But in over the 100 years of the IAU, there's never been a General Assembly of the IAU on the African continent, right? And so this General Assembly in 2024 was put through as an African bid by astronomers in South Africa and also in partnership with astronomers from other parts of the continent. And we're also trying to use this General Assembly as something that can leave a legacy for Africa, right? To say that we hosted this big IAU General Assembly on the African continent, but how did that leave astronomy on the continent? How did that have an impact towards what sort of difference astronomy made to the life of Africans? And so one of the things that we have is this project that's contributing towards the legacy of the General Assembly, which is the Vision 2024. And through this as well, we release a number of calls and sort of get people to sort of contribute to what this vision is. I will just put the link into the chat also, just so that you can go and have a look at the vision document and what it speaks about. So this General Assembly is taking place in 2024 in South Africa, in Cape Town, and so what we really wanted to achieve with the session that we had during the US Africa Summit is to sort of encourage participation both in Africa and in the US, and also sort of collaborate with our US colleagues on how we can contribute to the vision and the legacy of the event in 2024. So our session just ended less than an hour ago. And I don't know if you'll allow me to share screens that we did come up with a number of resolutions from that session. Maybe I can just share those with you here. I'll just try to be brief. Oh, I don't have hosting right yet. Okay, there we go. Right. So these are just some of those resolutions from the session. So that part is just containing the general information. So one of the resolutions was for Africa and the US communities to be encouraged to participate in the General Assembly in 2024 and also use this to drive the long-term collaboration for the vision. And I'll put this in this link into the chat, and also to be contributors to these big focus meetings that are organized during the General Assembly, and these focus meetings are sort of what drives science globally in astronomy. And I'm actually proud to say that they've been actually 2 proposals that have been put through by African-led groups, which sort of also tells us that we are also doing some globally competitive astronomers, and you're collaborating with the rest of the world as well, right? So we also spoke about the need for more coordinated capacity developing programs in science, and also some bi-directional exchange of personnel between Africa and the US in terms of various opportunities in terms of scholarship, supervision, and things like that. And we also looked at how we can use the respective societies, which is the African Astronomical Society and the American Astronomical Societies, because these are the links between the 2 communities, right, due to their memberships. I'm actually head of Secretariat at the African Astronomical Society, and we had present our president and the vice president of the WAS, just so that we could have some sort of discussions, and so this is basically just to promote participation in capacity building, and also get the support of policymakers, right, from across both regions. So we also spoke about collaborations and synergies that are for mutual benefit, looking in terms of infrastructure. There was something that Meshack mentioned, which I felt was very important, which is this geographic advantage that we have as the African continent. We've got some of the most dark skies in the world, and that allows us to host some of the world-class facilities, right, and telescopes. And we sort of need to continue to sell Africa as you know, as this place that's got the capacity and the capability to host these large infrastructure projects that can contribute to the global body of knowledge in astronomy globally. So we also spoke about having some coordinated programs, that we can develop in terms of calls, and some student exchanges, as I did mention, and also hosting of astronomy schools that can sort of help in the capacity building. And there were various number of things that you spoke about, which is astronomy for development as well. South Africa actually hosts one of the IAU Office for Astronomy for Development, and there's a number of these other regional offices which are hosted across the world. And we had the American regional office and the Southern African regional office for Astronomy for Development that were also participating, and also seeing how we can stimulate activities sort of around these regional offices and sort of use them as hubs. Then we spoke about organizing meetings or special sessions, right? I mean, this is, for example, one of those special sessions where it brought together the American and the African community together. So maybe even during our own annual conferences, we could sort of have sessions that sort of speak to these collaborations, so that our communities can meet and talk about things that they can work on together. And we also talked about joint astronomy initiatives that should ensure that they are more equal partnerships, and it's not more like the other parties are being donors to Africa, but they should sort of be at a equal level, right? And they should be more joint and be encouraged by both regions. And just the last point, which just ties up these resolutions, is that we should actually present these to leadership structures, so that they can also see what the communities are thinking, and they can also be contributors to the sort of discussions that we as the people on the ground engage on. Yeah, thanks.
This is excellent. I believe this document will be publicly available, apart from being on the AAS website.
Right. Yeah. You can also just send me your email address on the chat. So when I send it out to the participants from the session later today, then that you can also get a copy.
Okay, I'll do that. Thank you. Astronomy is one of the thematic focus areas of the African space policy and strategy. Charles, what is the level of synergy between the AAS, that's the African Astronomical Society, and the African Union Commission?
Right. So we've had a number of synergies over the years. And for those of you that might not know, the African Astronomical Society was just recently relaunched, right? So it was initially launched in 2010, and it was relaunched in 2019 again. So there had been some collaborative activities around between 2011 to 2014 that led to some infrastructure projects. For example, one of them is the Atlas telescope that is hosted on the South African Astronomical Observatory site, which looks at scanning the skies for asteroids that can pose a potential danger for life on Earth, right? Any near Earth objects. And there've been some radio astronomy infrastructures as well, which includes the Hydrogen Epoch of Ionization Array, which looks to study the very early days or the very early period in the universe history. So there's been some synergies, but in this there have been very little that focus on capacity building. And I think one thing that we can look forward from the discussions that we had today is that we are now extending these into now including human capacity development and issues around education and outreach. Yeah.
Meshack, would you like to contribute to that?
Yes. In fact, thank you so much, Takalana, for bringing this into our attention, because as the team said, astronomy is one of the pillars of the African space strategy, apart from satellite communication, Earth observation, and navigation. And in fact, there should be more efforts of synergies around this area. And I remember having some conversations some time ago about, organizing some capacity development activity next year with, it's called DARA, which I believe it's also supporting, a lot of capacity development on Africa. For the big data and in astronomy and how it can be used for development. So probably we'll further this discussion a little bit to find out, how this can be done on a practical basis within next year or the coming year. So ETIM, I think it's a challenge to us as well to, emphasize more collaboration, not only in Earth observation, but in other domains. because I know the bias has always been on Earth observation, but we need to look into other areas like satellite communication and navigation and astronomy. That is, it's not, doesn't mean that we have failed a lot, because as you know, the African Space Agency is just shaping up. In fact, it's been operationalized. Within next year, there will be, the structuring process and all that. And currently, we are not many in the team, but we are trying to do as much as we can do. There, we have been having a lot of synergies in navigation and positioning, but for astronomy, we need a special focus to have this more engagement and practical work or activities on the ground.
Yeah, Meshack, I think one thing that could also be great is if we could, as the African Astronomical Society, be able to engage with the African Space Agency. So I don't know, would you be the contact person for that for us to get in touch with?
Well, yeah, you can pass the message to me, and I will bring it to the attention of the coordinator.
Right.
The African Space Agency will be in shape next year. For now, it's not fully operational, because we need to, resource it with the human resource and many other things that will happen in the course of next year in the first phase. But for now, we have a team that is working around the African Space Program, and we can do that to ensure that there is an activity on astronomy.
I believe maybe, I think, especially towards the GA, the General Assembly 2024, I guess the AS has a plan to engage with the African Union Commission. I believe so. Is that, Charles?
So I sort of missed you there. What was that?
Yeah, I'm talking about in respect of the planning for the General Assembly 2024, a very high-level event, a global event, first time in Africa. I'm just trying to confirm that you're going to engage with the African Union Commission in the planning and organizing of that event. Is that?
Right. In fact, we have written to the commissioner to the African Union, and we're just waiting for a response. And I also engaged with what was it? Hamba. What's his name? Sorry, I think we.
Hambani. Yeah.
Hambani just last week during the World Science Forum. And so, yeah, we just want to also just revive that discussion. And yeah, like Meshack, like I said, you can just put your email address in the chat as well, and then we can get in touch with you. Great.
Okay, thank you, Charles. If I may come back to you, Meshack, it appears one of the high points of the Space Forum, as you mentioned, was the signing of the Artemis Accords by Nigeria and Rwanda. Which other countries have indicated interest in signing the accords?
As far as I know, I overheard Kenya was interested to the signature, and this is just the starting point. We will have a ripple effect in terms of the signature. But I think what is important is to highlight the importance of this signature. As I said before, we are looking at it on a win-win basis. I think I saw a question on the chat asking, what is the benefit of it and how is it going to benefit Africa? But I think here's the thing: with or without our country's signature, the Artemis program will still go. And the purpose of having this consent of signatures is actually to position ourselves as a key partner to the enabling of the lunar economy. As you realize, the lunar economy in Africa has been missing a lot. I know there is an effort going on with the Moon Village at the engagement level, but really when it comes to the activities and to make it actual, if we don't take care, we're going to be left out in this revolution, and this is to our detriment. So the key thing about signing some of these agreements is actually to walk along with those who are already ahead of us and implementing, and then fit ourselves on a niche basis on where to contribute in this economy. And I said before that when we think about the moon, it's not only about getting there. There is survival, sustainability on the moon. There is also extraction of minerals and resources, and we can provide some of these soft skills. The geographic advantages, I believe that the Artemis program will have a lot of launches, for example, that require back-to-back regular launches. And looking at, for example, the weather conditions of the US and the ports that the launching pads that they have, the spaceport, they may not be able to support all that. So I believe establishing one in Africa where we have clear weather, clear sky, more launch windows, and saving on the fuel. This will have a ripple effect, including lowering the carbon emission, and this is the big advantage that we are seeing. We can support the analog missions on the desert and so on. So it's not just looking at it in terms of what you benefit at the time, but it's looking at what you can contribute and which role you can play in enabling this this domain of lunar economy.
President Paul Biya of Cameroon, he gave a keynote address during the Space Forum. Even though Cameroon has not yet signed the Artemis Accords, can you just give us a brief highlight of his intervention?
Oh yes, the main interventions. I will go further to include also Rwanda.
Okay.
The two presidents highlighted the knowledge of how space is contributing to the economies of these countries. It doesn't require a country to have a space program for it to be, benefiting from space. All of us are actually, whether consciously or unconsciously, using space services, and they recognize this. And Cameroon and Rwanda came back to say that some of the services that are critical to the government, spanning from agriculture, location-based services, and so on, are actually benefiting from the space services, and this is why they want to be part of the development of the space in their countries in Africa, as well as in collaboration with the US. Rwanda, for example, gave highlights about hosting some of the antennas that can support the tracking of spacecraft like the Orion and so on, including the launches that happen on the soil of the US to track them along the equatorial region. And these are critical things that came from the leadership of these countries, meaning that they are fully aware and they are committed to supporting the space development on a mutual win-win basis.
Thank you. So South Africa is actively involved in the Artemis program as right now, especially in tracking of the recent mission and, of course, possibly future missions. Was there any delegation from South Africa at this summit? And if there was, what was their intervention?
Specifically for the Space Forum, I might have missed them. I didn't see their presence there at the Space Forum. As you know, it was a very short event, but very, very important and critical because it set the pace for the other events that happened during the day. I believe they are around and they are also keenly following on probably signing the Artemis programs and moving forward to support the Artemis through tracking and data telemetry, because they are hosting one of the terminals that have the telemetry capability and the tracking. So as you can see, we are already contributing to these programs, and there's a recognition that NASA administrator mentioned that there's a recognition that Africa is a contributor rather than just a receiver of services.
Charles, would you like to add to that? What is South Africa's position with respect to the Artemis Accords?
Yeah, no, I unfortunately I can't speak on behalf of the South African space agency. Yeah, but look, I just feel that in terms of space and astronomy, in a country like South Africa, for example, is that we are sort of seen as two different parts. So there's an astronomy and space science focus. But I feel really that if we are to progress, firstly, as the African continent, we need to come together, right, and sort of bring these two disciplines, so that we can work with them to sort of ensure that the whole African continent gets the benefits of both worlds. It's unfortunate that there are some countries that would be in astronomy but not participating in space science, and bringing astronomy and space science together can sort of be this mid playing field for everyone to come together and contribute. But from the South African perspective, South Africa is always really positive and encouraging to some of the efforts that benefit the whole African continent, and I think that this would also include other areas that the continent is already looking at and supporting. So yeah, that's just more from my side, I think.
Yeah, thank you. It's like you said, in South Africa, somehow core space, if I may use that word, seems to be separated from astronomy. But let's talk about the SKA. I don't know, was it up for discussion during this summit, the square kilometer array?
So we didn't really speak on individual projects, but the square kilometer array, I think that is one of the example projects of that can be seen as a flagship in Africa, and some of the spin-offs for some of the other African countries through the African VLBI network. And I think that's just really one program that's just going to bring everyone together. But through the African Astronomical Society, looking at the African VLBI network, we are looking at ways in which we can get other African continents to benefit from Africa hosting this big SKA project in Africa. You know that some of the projects currently are only focusing on the IFES partner countries, but one of the things we are trying to do is sort of expand on sort of how these projects can also benefit other non-SKA partner countries on the African continent.
Yeah, like the US, it appears they were not in. The level of support the US gave to the SKA in the past was kind of suboptimal. With this interaction, with this summit, do you think there's going to be any change or improvement with the US support to the SKA?
Yeah, look, the US have always been in support of the SKA project one way or another, and I think particularly from the science point of view, I think that from the discussions today, there's a willingness to participate to collaborate between the communities, right, on the SK and other similar projects. I mean, with the US, you'll know that they're now looking at expanding what is their VLA array into a next generation VLA project, which is going to have similar capabilities with the SKA, right? And I think that there's going to be a great area for synergies into the future.
Okay, thank you. So, Meshack, if I may come back to you, let's take some of the key issues that were discussed, maybe look at them a bit more, like the issue on climate change. Not just last month, there was COPs in Egypt. So climate change is also something of very importance to Africa. So what was the major outcome or takeaway as regards climate change? Any new project, any program, any policy?
Well, the major outcomes of the summit are not fully available yet. But what I can say is that there was a lot of emphasis on, the contribution of space on some of these sectors, not only as a technology part of it, but contributing to the real issues, mitigation of climate change, adaptation, and so on. What I can say is that, for example, we had a very fruitful discussion with NASA yesterday, And one of the things that we are looking at is, for example, apart from synergizing with Savir Africa, GMS and Africa to double the effort. As you know, GMS and Africa is a collaboration between Europe and Africa on Earth observation stemming from the Copernicus program, but also looking at Savir, which stemmed from NASA and USAID collaboration with Africa. We're looking at the areas of synergy. And yesterday we had deep discussions with the manager of Savir here at NASA, and we also had a conversation with the NASA headquarters on how to have a blanket kind of arrangement between NASA and African Union Commission around space, and some of these things are going to feed into that. The programmatic approaches that are going to be realized will feed into this framework of work that is going to come under that umbrella. And I believe all of them will be addressing issues like climate change, disaster management, including other areas that we are identifying.
And one other critical issue had to do with strengthening cooperation in science and commercial space activities. And in fact, on the second day, that was yesterday, there was the US-Africa Business Forum. Was there any engagement in terms of space companies? Anybody showing interest in coming to invest in Africa, whether it's the upstream or downstream sector?
So I happened to be in one of the side events that was the Kenya-US engagement on investment, not only in science, technology, but in other areas, holistic investment per se. And space was one of the components. And we highlighted, the importance of viewing space as one of the economic development pillars for both continents, as it has been in the US. And many companies are pledging to, come and work with the African, countries as well as the companies. So we expect to see a lot of interaction between the US companies and African companies. And we also anticipate to see a lot of matrix of engagement, whether between private sector, government, private sector, academia, and so on. So I can say that there is a lot of commitment from the space companies that want to have a footage or footprint on the continent, and on a mutually win-win basis with regards to the entire ecosystem.
That's fine. So, there's a lot of talk about investment coming in from the US into Africa. What about the other way? The African space industry too is also, for example, in South Africa, we have companies that can build systems and subsystems. In many instances, they send their output to the maybe Eastern region, Middle East, and Asia. The US market, is it open for African companies, African space companies? Any discussion about that, removing trade barriers and things like that?
Yes, I'm actually waiting for the main outcomes of the holistic, resolutions from the forum itself, because it's going to affect all the value chain, not only specifically to space. Because so long as there is, standardized ways of approving, some of the content or components that can be manufactured from the African continent, and they get approved in the US, I think the trade barriers are not there anymore. So as I said from the beginning, this forum was focused on the trade. And that's why we have components from the African a continent like the AfCFTA, which is the African Free Trade Area, Free Trade Zone, and having deep discussions with the US commerce and industry. And whatever happens, whatever, agreement is there, or whatever, standards that are going to be agreed upon, it's going to affect all the entire value chain, including space. And I believe there is a lot of, as you said, these companies are already exporting some components to the US, meaning that we have already passed, some of those verifications, and the other way around. It's an exciting time, I should say so, because for the first time, I'm seeing that there is a lot of acknowledgement that Africa is not only on the table to receive, it's actually contributing, and it's a two-way interaction. And this is the time for the space companies in Africa also to show their capability in this area.
Okay, thank you. So participants that have any intervention, you can use the chat box if you have any question or if you have any comments, and then I'll bring it up to the attention of the guest. So Charles, if I may come to you, there was a plan for a meeting with the U.S. Committee on Science, Space, and Technology. That's the House of Rep. I don't know, has that meeting taken place?
No, I don't think that has taken place yet. I haven't seen any notification on it as yet.
Oh, okay. So going forward now, how does the AAS now, how do you want to build on the outcome of this summit?
Right. So what we're doing now is that, like I mentioned in one of our resolution points, is that we will be organizing special sessions at the community meetings. So when the AAS hosts the meeting, we'll have a special session looking at Africa-US collaborations, and when FAS hosts, then we'll be doing the same. So in January, the AAS is hosting their winter meeting. So there's going to be participation from Africa in terms of in this case, the African Astronomical Society and the National Organizing Committee from the IU General Assembly 2024. We've got a number of activities, and also we'll be engaging with the US astronomy community during that meeting.
Okay, so there's a question from one of the participants. It's asking what is the exact details in the Artemis Accords or any new agreement between the US and African nations. I don't know if any of you wants to take up that question.
Well, I think I understood partly that question. If you look at the Artemis Accord, it's an accord. It's not such binding, and what it means is that it's just a constant for people to move together in agreement, and it's actually building from the space treaty, just acknowledging that our activities on the moon should be used according to the international standards and laws, and that there should be peaceful uses of space and the moon, just like it was agreed upon on the space treaty, which is the governing document around any space activities that are there. But this is only that I believe Artemis Accord stemmed from the fact that only one country doesn't want to fully to be, like the one that is dominating on the moon market, but it wants to, go there in line with the international regulations, as well as, having the consent of many other countries along. And I believe the whole document can be found online. I haven't checked, but I think it can be found online, and the entire content can be interpreted from there.
Yeah, the document it's online. Yeah, I think the comment I see here: if the Artemis Accords was produced by the UN, I wouldn't be skeptical. Whereas this is being developed only for a certain group of nations. So I think, Meshack, what you're saying is, the Artemis Accords, if I understand, is connected to the Artemis program. So if you want to be part of the Artemis program, then you can sign up to the Artemis Accord, but it's not a treaty kind of a thing. It's not mandatory, if I get what you said, Meshack.
Yeah, exactly. You said it well, Etienne. And that's what I said. Even if you don't consent to it, those who are ready to go to the moon will still go.
Okay. So, Meshack, sorry, let's compare the relationship between the AU and the US. let's put it side by side with the Africa-EU partnership. In the Africa-EU partnership, there are specific particular programs or projects, like you mentioned earlier, GMES in Africa, EGNOS in Africa, ClimeDev, and I think there's a plan to bring up a communication project called IRISH2. For the US-Africa partnership, what specific programs or projects are kind of in the horizon?
Well, I just mentioned that we had interesting conversations with NASA yesterday, and we are identifying the areas of collaboration without preempting. For example, there will be things to do with other observation-oriented programs. There will be things to do with other programmatic approaches in the other 3 domains of space, and looking at, for example, internationalization or continentalization of some programs. We've been pushing for the continentalization of, the NASA international internships, which I believe will feature into some of these cooperation arrangements. And probably you mentioned, GMS in Africa because of how of the continent to continent approach. It's built upon a history that has happened before. I think the engagements between Europe and Africa have been there for a long time, and we acknowledge that for the US-Africa relations, they are just rebuilding at the moment, and that's why we probably don't have a lot of continent-to-continent engagement. Even if you look at the model of Seville, for example, they have been using different nodes, but coordinated centrally from the US side. But if you look at programs on the European side, Europe and Africa collaboration, it's actually a fully delegated collaboration in which the African Union Commission, for example, leads the effort and organizes the institutions around the continent. And I believe this is one of the areas that we are going to look at, the different governance models of these programmatic approaches between US and Africa.
Any plan to integrate the GMES and Africa program with Sevier or any other Earth observation program?
Yeah, I wouldn't say integrate. We are actually talking of synergies. We have started development of terms of reference and identifying the main pillars of engagement, including capacity building, the services that we are developing, how are these data sets going to interact coming from different pools, like, as you know, Seville, normally relies on most data sets from US, and GMS in Africa relies on data sets from Europe. And we're going to see how this can be synergized so that the services can be of more value to the African communities and to the decision-making processes.
Charles, there's a question in the chat box. I don't know whether which of you, or whether Charles would like to respond to it. I'll just put it in general form, which is one of the things. Some of the things expected from this summit are different kinds of agreements on different areas, especially if you look at the thematic focus areas in terms, for the African space policy and strategy. So the question is, how reliable are these agreements? How sustainable are they? I'm just trying to generalize the question. I don't know which of you want to respond to that, Charles or Meshack.
Okay. I'm trying to interpret this. Okay, can Africa trust new agreements with US, especially considering the US recent actions again? You remember there's a long-standing arrangement that probably is going to be revived now with this summit, which is the AGOA. I believe you know about the agreement on trade with the between Africa and the US. And this, for example, is one part that is going to be highlighted during this agreement. I mean, during this summit. I think trust is a strong word to respond to, but I believe there are mutual agreements that are going to come, out of this summit, whether it's country to country or as I said, from the US side and then with the African Union through the AFCFTA program, because I said before that the US is also recognizing that the African bloc is becoming a real bloc that cannot be ignored, with all the population, with all the market size, with all the things to contribute and to also export some of these, services from the continent to the US, and there is a whole recognition about that. I believe, we cannot talk about, the disputes specifically, for example, US, China, and the rest, because these are specific areas that, they have their own history, and I don't think Africa was involved in all this. But I think to sum it up is that we cannot move ahead on our own and pretend that, even with the whole population, we cannot satisfy ourselves with the market size. We definitely need international engagement, and I believe US is not also something to ignore. There is that recognition. And also the US is coming to the realization that Africa is not a bloc to ignore. And so long as you have this equal, point of engagement, then the solution to trade shouldn't be that difficult. We just have to highlight the terms, and I leave it to the lawyers and to several other experts who are involved in this process to really determine the terms of engagement.
Yeah, so thank you, Meshack. I'm talking about the AGOA. I think one of the presidents was proposing that AGOA should be extended for another 10 years. I think by the end of today, we'll know what's the final agreement of that. So on a final note, Meshack, so how does the AU want to build on the momentum that this summit has created?
Well, I think this question is really interesting. I wish that we had the resolutions ready, because one of the anticipated outcomes of this summit is that, for example, the US is going to support the African Union admission to the G20 countries, the pact of the G20. And that means a lot in terms of decision making on the global issues. Issues to do with peace and security and trade are taking center stage, climate change included, and several other cross-cutting factors. And, all this is to mention that there will be a long-term engagement. You just highlighted the anticipation of AGOA extension to several years. And this is highlighting, there will be a long-term engagement between the African continent and the US. And I believe this is going to be sustainable for many other reasons. As you realize, the US is recognizing that other continents are actually paying a lot of attention to the African continent, and they don't want to be left behind. So I believe this is just one of the areas that the momentum will be built. I know. I think one of the things is that the two continents might wish to make this a regular activity, the summits, to have regular discussions to review the terms of engagement every now and then. and it is up to us now to think of which areas we really want to bring on the table and to benefit from. And every time there is an opportunity to review, this momentum will always be reviewed.
I guess maybe by the end of today also we'll know maybe it will be a regular event like the one with China, that is every 3 years, the one with Japan. One of the things you mentioned earlier was the panel on the capacity building. Was there any discussion about the Pan-African University Institute for Space Science, maybe getting a support towards that program?
It was not mentioned specifically, but the forum itself was just, to set the momentum. As I said, we are, reviewing some engagement with NASA, and I believe this one will feature inside the framework of approach.
Okay, Charles, if I may come to you also. So with the momentum that has been kind of created, how do you foresee the relationship between the African Astronomical Society and the US Astronomical Society going forward?
Yeah, look, I think that I see a lot of positive things coming out. And I mean, we both agree that we'll be taking some of these things we discussed today to our executive committees and then later to our members as well. And then we will sort of be all in constant contact to ensure that there is progress in these things and then holding one another accountable. So definitely, I see that these discussions were really fruitful, and yeah.
I think there's one more session this evening on the roundtable with National Society of Black Physicists. Is that?
Right. Yes. Yep. There is that session, and there's going to be an astronomy component to it. And yeah.
So yeah, what is the how do I frame it now? The message you're taking there, or what are you expecting from that roundtable?
So generally, it's also sort of get the astronomers that are in the diaspora more involved in the work at EFAS. And I think that they are also an important part of our community and can provide us with that link with the American community as well, right? So that's sort of the discussions that we are looking at during that session. But also there are ways that they feel that they can contribute towards astronomy in Africa, and those are the things that they also want to bring into that session. So we are really excited about this, and it's not really one of the first such sessions. We've had a similar session with them in 2014, and there was a lot of progress that was made after that. So we are also hoping that even after the session today, there's going to be something that we can look to and sort of point to in the future.
Okay, thank you, Meshack and Charles. Just on a final note, I want to believe, or maybe I should put in front of the question for, I don't know, what the level of communication to integrate the outcome of the US Space Forum and the astronomy sessions into one, and maybe to present it to the AU Assembly. Is this something that can happen?
Yeah. I mean, from our side, I think that if we can be provided that platform, I mean, even that audience with the African Union, I think that it's definitely something that we are willing to discuss with them, and I think even as a follow up to the letter that we sent to the AU, these resolutions are going to be something that we can present to them as well. Yep.
Yeah, I think that's the starting point. Thanks, Charles. I believe. Well, we normally take something to the attention of the assembly if there is any decision that has to be implemented. So if there is something that really has to be implemented from all these outcomes, I believe we will integrate all of them and see the need to take them through. As you know, at TIM there are several different policy making processes that need to happen before it goes to the attention of the heads of state. So this will depend on the actionable points that the Commission or the African Union members have to undertake.
Okay, I think there's still one question. Maybe I just take that. There's a question about engagement with Asia and South America. Even though the focus of this program is on the current US Africa partnership, do you have any very quick comments on how Africa can engage with Asia and South America alongside the US, just very quickly, both from the astronomy side and from space in general?
Yeah, I believe there is these two subcontinents. I'm not sure if there is any particular engagement that is happening now. I believe it's on country to with individual countries, like with India, with China, with those specific countries. I would need to look at the different arrangements of these subcontinents. If Asia is organized into a pact like Africa is, this is always the challenge. The Southern Americans or the South America side, it's very important because this is it presents comparable challenges that we are facing as the continent, and this cannot be ignored. But in terms of their organizations, as you know, the African continent has been presenting itself as a bloc, and it will be easier if these two subcontinents also come in as a bloc so that we can have that particular engagement.
And finally, Charles, on the astronomy side, yes, we are talking about engagement with the US, but what about opportunities to engage with Asia and South America with respect to astronomy?
Yeah. We are already looking at this, and I think from continental society's point of view, we sort of always use that the community representative there, which is the astronomical societies, as the entry point or contact point for us to be able to start discussions with the relevant people and to make collaborations possible. So we are already starting some discussions with them, and for example, with some of the, we are also through South Africa interacting with BRICS, which also have some of these countries that are in some of these, for example, in Asia and in South America, right? And we are sort of seeing how we can use the models of some of their projects, to sort of work together with them. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much, Meshack, joining us from Washington, D.C. I know it's morning, and I think you have some sessions now to join. And thank you also, Charles. So I think we can stop at this point so that we can join the remaining sessions for today. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you, all the participants that were able to join today. Like I mentioned earlier, apologies for the sudden change of time and schedule. So I look forward to seeing us in another program like this, where we engage on activities or events that affect Africa. Thank you,
Tim.
I wish you holidays, compliments of this season.
Thank you so much, Tim, for organizing us into this, and we just hope that we'll have regular events like this where we can share our different experiences, our different plans, because this is one of the platforms that is giving us the impetus to communicate as the space community.
Yeah, sure. Hopefully, we plan to actually have more of this in the next year. Thank you very much. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. All right. Yeah, cheers. Bye for now.